Right. So I hope you're all well. Probably like most of us, you're regardless of where you are in the country, the weather is a little bit inclement, but hopefully you're somewhere comfortable. At this point in time, there was sort of talk about outdoor classes and so on and so forth, and I always feel obliged to point out that if you do arrange outdoor classes, you have to have sort of weather contingencies. So it can be okay practicing Tai Chi out in the rain or even in the cold for a little while, but yeah, don't overdo it. Do make sure that if you do go outside, it's quite nice sometimes in the rain, as long as you can get dry again, isn't it? But for now, just bring yourself into our usual routine. So hopefully this is familiar to you all now. It's like a sort of litany that we go through. Feet below the hips, hip width apart, toes pointing forwards, weight slightly forwards, hips dropping back, and so on and so forth. Just bringing your attention to whichever of those elements actually works for you in this moment. So we want certain things in place as regards our posture and our movement. We want an alignment with the pull of gravity, the weight sinking down, the rooting down. We want to turn from the center of the body. There's other things as well. But in the first instance, it's really a case of settling your attention into your body by whatever means is most available to you. So it might be the flow of the movement, the rhythm of the movement. It might be the feeling in your legs. It might be the feeling in your upper body. One of the big things for me comes really from my first teacher, and one of the things she used to say frequently to us, which is that you'll find yourself standing like this in the supermarket queues. And at first I thought, no way. But as I probably said before, I did find myself starting to do that. And it's not so much the act of standing in the supermarket queue as it is this feeling of just for a moment, what we might describe as letting go. I think the term letting go is a touch unfortunate. It can be a bit of a cliche, but it's also very appropriate because you're just relinquishing that strain, that struggle. And I think that sums up a kind of mind-body feeling that just for a moment or two, we find ourselves in a kind of quieter, calmer space, less straining the body and so on and so forth. And it's a reminder that we can have this to come back to. When we get into the main body of exercises, then you'll realize that that idea of coming back to something is built into the system. And then just raising your arms. And then let your hands drop. So the term Tai Chi, or Tai Chi as it's sometimes pronounced, is somewhere in between really, is represented by this symbol, the symbol that we often refer to as the yin-yang symbol. And it really represents a kind of harmony between what we often think of as opposites and a movement between those opposites. So in very generic terms, yang would be the outward movement, the expanding movement, yin would be the drawing back movement. And all the movements have that harmony, that movement from yin to yang. So the yin element, if you like, can be seen as the the coming back. And it's never a fixed thing. It's not one thing, it's not still, there's always movement between the two. So we could think of the start and indeed the finish of the class as being those yin elements within the class, where we settle in at the start and we do the same thing at the end. When we do embrace tiger, we return to mountain, and then we go into the exercises, sort of pushing out a little bit, finally coming back. So just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. Seeing if you can just find that feeling of being in line without too much concern initially about exactly where that is, but just seeing if you can recognize a feeling. Our posture is constantly changing. The whole point really, or one of the points of Tai Chi practice is to just sort of work with that process of change. So it's not necessarily a fixed thing, but the sense that, yeah, you're in the right place, if you see what I mean, is hopefully a growingly familiar one. So then just come into rest, and before we carry on, just try this, and there's no expectation that you're going to maintain this, but what we're looking for ultimately, I need to go a bit further back, is that we want to settle our weight just behind the ball of each foot. If I'm back in my heels, I'm sort of slumped over, even falling backwards. If I'm too far forwards in my toes, I'm struggling to move forwards. But when the weight settles behind the ball of each foot, we have this slight sense of leaning forwards. I'm exaggerating this a little bit, and it will encourage this settling in process. But it keeps your weight just a little bit forward. So it's quite an energetic posture, although we come to a kind of still point. If you think about it, when I'm in this position, with a very slight effort, I take a step. I've only got to nudge myself forwards. So in this standing position, although you're standing still, you've got almost enough energy to take a step. So that's one of the features of this of this exercise, and indeed the whole practice. It's this interesting combination of the potential for movement, but also the potential for stillness. Once again, yang, yin, blended in harmony. You're not necessarily going to be able to stay there. Your body needs to condition to enable that. Don't have your weight further forwards than the ball of your foot, but if you're more comfortable with your weight a little bit back, that's fine. And then just letting your weight drop back, sinking down and pushing up. This should be a fairly straightforward operation, because it should just be a matter of allowing our hips to drop back. In practice, it can be quite difficult because it's quite a strong posture. It's also kind of runs against how we're often told to stand. We're always encouraged to kind of pull ourselves up and so on and so forth. That is apparently impossible. Somebody spent some time trying to explain to me why it was impossible. I have to say, I didn't understand it. She was trying her best, but the laws of physics mean that we can't just lift ourselves up. Doesn't matter how strong you are. So you can't actually hold yourself up. You're inevitably going to strain. So this adjustment in both the way we're standing and, in a sense, in the way we're thinking about how we stand, the rooting down, remains one of the principal foundations for the art at whatever level you're playing. And you bring your hands around and pushing up and pressing down. In the long run, that postural change should allow for a much freer, smoother movement. The other thing we want to try and do, using an image like moving through water, is to connect up the different parts of the body. The trouble with that, a loose feeling in the body, is that it can feel quite disconnected. But that little bit of resistance that the image of moving through water offers persuades the body, fools the body into thinking, if you like, that there is that resistance there, and the way we move begins to change. I'm sure we've all had the experience of going to open a door that we thought was sticking and giving it a good pull, and it just sort of swinging open very easily, or the other way around where we think it's going to open but it doesn't. Or you go to pick something up expecting it to be light and it's heavy. You go to pick a bag up, there's nothing in it. Oh, there's something in it, and then you lift it again. How you lift it the second time is different, and it's that stronger, more connected quality that we want to try and build in to all the movements in Tai Chi. A change to the wild goose. So that strengthening works on very subtle elements of the body, not just the muscles, but tendons and ligaments. This is perhaps one of the distinctions of the internal arts like Tai Chi and Qigong, that rather than focusing on this muscle group or that muscle group, we look to build the strength harmoniously through the whole of the body. And in doing so, we also start to change the nature of the movement. It becomes a little bit more fluid, a little bit denser, I suppose you could say. And that internal change in the movement, the energy, however you think of it. For me, I like them, like the difference between feeling a light breeze on your skin or feeling water flowing over your skin. The latter has that slightly stronger quality to it. And then parting the clouds. So at in the opening exercises of a session like this, going through the familiar routines, not having to think too much about, well, what you're doing now and what comes next, gives us an opportunity to again remember, to remind ourselves of these basic elements and to work with them. They're things that I think all Tai Chi players are constantly working to develop. And that's more easily done, more accessible in a set of movements that's familiar to us. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky. When we're considering matters like strength, we always have to think about what that actually means. So the term strength, the term inner strength is the one that we more often use in Tai Chi. And it has a different sense to it, different feeling to it than we would normally think of strength in the body. More elastic than stiff, not tight. And that helps to ensure that the movement continues for a start, and that again there's this sense of harmony in the movement. You're not having to strain or to force the movement. So this connects us to ideas that we find in Chinese medicine, in arts like acupuncture and so on, to get a sense of balancing the energy, allowing the energy to flow. I think it's been a bit like a central heating system. There's a blockage in the central heating system somewhere. The whole house will get cold. And that's the foundation for well-being in terms of Chinese medicine. One more time. And then change. So again, if we think about that harmonious flow, there's an in-breath and an out-breath. There's blood being pumped away from the heart towards the heart, movements extending, contracting. Once again, that sort of generic term of yin-yang. I think this one is perhaps a particularly useful one for getting that feeling of the harmonious movement in your body. It's very clear that we extend out from a particular point, that area around the hips, draw back into it. And what we can sometimes find is that we rush it. I think it's quite common to find ourselves getting to about here as we turn, and then sort of dashing in to the next movement, coming back quickly. It's even quite common to find that people try and get from one to the other without going through the middle, illogical as that sounds. But it's natural for us to do that, especially if you're a little bit uncertain about the movement. So we remind ourselves that both sides of this movement, both parts, the extension, yang, and the contraction, yin, are equally important to us. The other thing with this exercise is that it actually helps us to understand the possibility of a physical location for that inward movement, so a point of focus for our attention, that area around our hips and waist, and from there down into the legs. And it was that as much as anything else that I experienced as I stood in the supermarket, something to come back to. One more round. And then changing. Memory is an important thing, not remembering the complexities of exercises, but just reminding yourself of that feel, which is constant, that feel that we get when yin yang being in harmony, or when we have that kind of sense of touching base, the flow, whatever it is you relate to in those terms. And then adding the term. Also realizing that Tai Chi displays a possibility to us. We often don't think that it's possible to have that sense of harmony. We don't really get taught what it means. And so we very easily lose touch with it. Switch sides. So when we practice, when we attend a class, one of the things that's going on is just a reminder of the possibilities. Add in the turn if it's comfortable. Every now and then, just check in with your posture. And the time that I like to do that is round about here. Chances are that in the extension out and the turn in, I've kind of lost some of that, but I can regain it here. And likewise, as we go into rowing a boat in the middle of the lake, it's here as my hips drop back that I find that posture again. And here that I realize that gravity can actually help me to find it by allowing gravity to draw my hips down, to yield in my hips and my lower back rather than to strain. And then stand. The whole of the martial side of Tai Chi actually depends on these ideas, which makes it a very powerful idea. So, I mean, we might, you might not want to be thinking of things like that, but the kind of principle is that yin and yang will always change over. An extension will always contract, the day will always turn to night, and so on and so forth. Is it somebody trying to push you or to punch or something like that, sooner or later their energy is going to dissipate, and we try and find that moment to return the compliment, I suppose you could say. It's something that we employ quite naturally in our lives. If you've ever chopped wood, chances are you chopped with the grain, for instance. So it's a kind of natural thing, but it's taken to quite a sophisticated level with Tai Chi. So the idea would be that in any given situation, if we can be aware of the dynamic of the situation, sooner or later there'll be an opportunity for that sort of return. And one of the sayings in Tai Chi, I think for me is quite important, is when we're urged in one of the old writings to seek the stillness within the movement. We tend to think of the two as being opposites. You're either moving around or you're still. But in Tai Chi, we look to find where they meet and how they harmonize. So just transferring from side to side. Which element you focus on at any particular time is very much about what is appropriate to you. And I find in my own practice that sometimes I get up in the morning, sometimes I really want to move. Other times I just want to be still for a while before I move. So you get to learn what is appropriate for you at any particular time, in a sense where you are within that cycle. Just keeping the weight moving. I'm not sure what happened there. I think somebody maybe unmuted themselves. So again, we can find reference points, and I think, you know, if you're interested in Tai Chi and developing the art, then a really important reference point is that feeling of connection to the ground. We can lose it very easily in the process of moving, but we can find it again each time we complete the transfer. So each time you transfer your weight and settle into one leg, it's another way of touching base, if you like. And then at that point, if you raise your heel and turn, you get more movement. So the stillness that we get through, if you like, touching the ground leads to a greater scope for movement. And those of you who have looked at the Tai Chi forms and maybe struggled with them a little bit, remember this, because there are plenty of times within the forms or within the more complex exercises that we do that allow for that centering process. Now bring your hands around in front of you and into hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. So we extend out, sinking down but extending out at the same time now, but coming through the center here and then extending out again. So we sink down, we shift across, we get that sense of the ground beneath our feet, and then we can extend out and we draw back in, find that midpoint again, and then move off to the other side. I'm describing this process in very linear terms, which of course it isn't, but it's a useful device, a useful tool for understanding these things. Do one more of these. Probably your feet would have turned out a bit while you're doing this. Try and just straighten them up a little bit as you do this. But now make it a horizontal movement. One arm extends out and you come back to the middle, and then the other arm circles out and you come back. Like a parallel stance version of stirring the beans. And I'm using this because when we do an exercise like stirring the beans, we can get very easily confused. But there's always a point where we come back to here, and then we can move out again and come back to here. It stops us getting too caught up in what's this arm doing and what's that arm doing. And we'll look at this again when we come to the forward stance. So we pass through that center, we pass through that still point. You could argue that as we develop in Tai Chi and learn more complicated movements, they're really there to test that very simple idea of, can we find that point of stillness, that center? And in that way, I think Tai Chi, again, is a very practical art, because it's all very well talking about being still and calm and letting go and so on and so forth, but it's not so easy to do in a busy, cluttered life. Extend out. We come back. We extend out. We come back. And your body will quite naturally begin to overlap those stages without it being a mess. You can just allow that to happen, keep in the back of your mind the principles, the rhythm of the movement. Just allow your body to flow a little. And then come back and stand. Shake out. So we learn how it feels to explore certain principles of movement. And I sometimes think that Tai Chi is a little bit like cooking. When you cook something, you prepare the ingredients. You do chop or whatever it is you do. You get everything ready, and then you put it in the pan or in the pot, and then the cooking takes place. There's a kind of blending of the ingredients and a blending of the flavors. We don't make that happen. We just create circumstances in which it happens quite naturally. So the rooting down, the alignment, all these ideas, yin yang, the images are all ingredients within the overall art. But the actual blending takes place during the process of practicing the exercise. So sometimes you'll find yourself focusing on particular elements, and particularly, kind of like sometimes one of my teachers will say, yeah, do this, or you're doing that wrong, or something like that, and then I'll become preoccupied with one particular thing. That's an inevitable part of learning. Now, take a step forwards. Once again, transferring your weight. Feeling the legs filling and emptying, is one way of describing it. The actual Chinese terms translate as something like substantial and insubstantial. But it's a bit of a mouthful. So the full leg would be the one with the weight, the empty leg, the other one. And it's quite an interesting image. If you get a glass full of water and an empty glass, and you pour the water from one glass to another, it's a very similar feeling in a way in the legs. And particularly important there is that if you pour water into a glass, the water doesn't sort of stop at the top of the glass and go, oh, I'm not sure if have I got this right. It just drops straight into the bottom of the glass and fills from the bottom upwards. So ideally, when we move the weight from one foot to another, when we begin the process of moving the weight, the first part of the body that we feel that in is the sole of the foot that we're moving towards. And even more precisely, if you can, that point of balance that you found at the beginning of the class. Okay, and shake out. Before we do the second side, just a technical point here. Most people find it harder to get their weight to drop into their back leg than into their front leg. And if you think about it, if that point of balance, let's say it's behind the ball of each foot, but it will tend to be slightly forwards in your foot. So if I go to move my weight forwards, the ball of my foot is a natural stop. I can do that, and the ball of the foot gets pushed in to the ground. So when I go from back to front, that movement is naturally taking me towards that balance point. When I go back, the first part of the foot that will physically receive the weight is the bit that's attached to the hip, which is the heel. It's a straight line from there. So I go back a little bit and my weight's in my heel. If I go back any further, I fall over. So whereas going forwards, it's if you like a kind of straight line down into the foot. Going back, it isn't a straight line because it has to go back and slightly forwards. The key part of the body that's going to affect that is the pelvis. If I'm here and I start to go back and I stick my hips out, that pulls me back. If I pull under, that sends me off. In the process of this movement from front to back, if we allow it to, the pelvis will naturally adjust. And it's the adjustment of the pelvis, the alignment of the pelvis that will actually keep your body upright. So we really don't want to strain around here, because if you tighten around here, then they're very, very subtle processes, these processes of alignment. And if you squeeze on the pelvis or the hips, it's going to make it more difficult. So try and move with an intent, with the knowledge of where you're going to take the weight to, but also with an intent that it's going to be the effort, if you like, initially at least, is in the leg and the foot. Try not to sort of pull yourself forwards like this, even if that means less movement. When you go into the back leg in particular, be careful on the front leg too, but be very careful of your back knee. Another way you can think of this, and please be careful with this, and don't do it if you're not comfortable with the idea, but when I'm in the back leg, if I just soften all the way, so when I'm in the front leg, if I soften all the way through the back leg, then this can happen. And suddenly I'm in my back leg. Just by doing nothing, it's like, whoops, is that. That's quite tricky, because obviously you're dropping quite suddenly into that back leg. So, you know, as I say, don't do that if you're at all uncomfortable with that. Be careful of your knee. And then shake out. So that movement and that posture really encapsulate a great deal of what's going on in Tai Chi. You could regard the full leg, the leg with the weight, as yang, the empty leg as yin, but don't get fixed on yin-yang being a set of values. They're generic terms, they're abstract terms, and they're as much concerned with relationship as they are with anything solid. And particularly in some circumstances, like in some areas of Chinese medicine, it's appropriate to say yin is this, yang is that, but mostly it's not like that. You could regard the full leg as being yang because it's supporting the body, but it's that leg that's connecting you to the ground. And in another context, the ground and the earth beneath your feet would be regarded as yin compared to the sky. So in that sense, it could also be yin. So they're relative values, and their actual meaning is very dependent on the context that you're looking at them in. Okay, so have any foot forwards. You want to do a particular leg. Hands on your belly, and pigeon spreads its wings. You might want to bring your breathing into the movement if that works for you. Remember, any movement in one direction, an opening of your chest, for instance, a movement of your weight forwards, will sooner or later change direction. And ideally, we're taking some ownership of that process. If I keep going forwards and reaching out, sooner or later I'm going to fall over. So what I want to do is to find the point of change, if you like, think of it like that. The point where you throw a ball up into the air, you try and make a judgment about when it's going to come down. One more time. And then change into fisherman castanet. And the intent in Tai Chi will be to never require the body to strain, to stiffen. Realize the importance of that yin element. So often we overlook that in our lives. There are constant pressures, constant demands on us for most of the time. And it would be very easy to fill our lives trying to fulfill those demands without ever taking stock, as it were. But those yin moments, those moments of drawing into yourself, are as vital for our lives as, if you like, the yang moments. They're also mutually reinforcing each other. You can't continue to give out without taking something in. And then pushing a wave. You could equally well say that the yin, if you like, needs some kind of expression. We're social creatures, we're active creatures. So I'm not saying that one is more important than the other. One more time. Another foot forwards, hands on your belly. Pigeon spreads its wings. Just as you do this, it's hopefully a familiar movement. Let's see if you can remember from the start of the class that feeling in your body of being in line, where you found that center of balance, all those basic principles, what it felt like to let your hips drop. What you may find is that as you think about those things, you suddenly find that your hips drop or you settle down more or something like that. Just the reminder can be powerful. And then fisherman castanet. One more time. Pushing away. One more time. And we have a natural tendency to speed up, and the more challenged we feel, the more that tendency will be there. So biological reaction, it's the fight or flight syndrome. When you're challenged, you feel under pressure. When you feel under pressure, part of your brain, part of your body, the rest of your body is preparing for fight or flight. Do you need to run? Do you need to fight? Can you, and so on and so forth. It's a very useful thing. If you're crossing the road and you suddenly realize there's a bus bearing down on you, standing still is probably not a great survival technique. Sometimes you need to move fast. But it's also a very limited technique, and the sort of nuances and the subtleties of our lives aren't always explorable, shall we say, through the use of fight or flight. It's also true that it can lead to a great deal of health problems, because if we're constantly being battered by problems and stresses, then the negative effects of that fight or flight can build up and lead to long-term health problems. But in the normal course of things, it only takes a minute or so for the full adrenaline cycle to disperse, but often we don't let it. So one little issue heaps on another, and it builds up over the months and the years. So again, that sense of coming back every now and then, finding that quietness offers the possibility of dispersing your body has mechanisms to naturally counter the effects of the adrenaline when they're no longer needed. We just need to give it space to do that. So, although I'm putting the emphasis on that yin element, it's not the only element in Tai Chi, but it's often the one that we find the most difficult to access. Watching people learn in Tai Chi, watching myself learning new movements, we want to speed up and to do it quickly, because there's a little bit of the hindbrain there that's very old and very ancient and thinks it's under threat, even if it's not. So now, just transferring your weight again and letting the center of your body turn. Have your right foot forward so you can mirror my movements. And think of this at the moment in two stages. You transfer the weight and then you turn. You transfer the weight and then you turn. And then with your front hand, your right hand, transfer the weight and turn, and watch what that does with your hand. Go forwards, transfer the weight and turn, and again, just notice the pattern of the hand. Transfer the weight and turn. Transfer the weight and turn. So your hand will naturally reach out, but then it will also get drawn back in. And again, my hand quite naturally these days will come in towards my center because I've trained to do that. Try with your left hand, your back hand, out and in, out, or moving and in. So on the transfer stage, we can think of that as a big sweeping movement. And as we settle in and turn, a kind of settling in, and then we move out again, big sweeping movement. So those two stages where we settle into the full leg are the sort of crossroads, shall we call them. And that's where we pause slightly, just for a second, to orientate ourselves. So you go into the back leg, you find that particular crossroads, and as you turn, you can bring your right arm back into it. You go into the front leg, that particular crossroads, and then you turn. And this will feel a bit odd to begin with because it's a bit segmented. But again, you should find fairly quickly that your body will learn where those crosswords are. Your mind will learn where those crosswords are. And like making a journey that you've made many times before, you'll make the right move without having to think too much about it. Again, you can also see the significance of the awareness. So again, we have stir in the beans. And shake it. And on the other side. So if it helps, think of this as the crossroad or on a journey. If you've made that journey lots of times, you probably don't even have to think about it anymore, but you're still aware of it. If you've never done the journey before, you might have to stop and think, well, which way do I go? If you've never encountered a crossroad or a junction, a roundabout, say, before, you might even be a bit confused. Well, what's this all about? How do I do it? So learning to do this in one context. If you learn to use a roundabout on a quiet road, if you're a cyclist or a driver, there's more likelihood that you'll be able to successfully negotiate a busier road as well. So these skills of awareness, as much as anything else, are in many ways the transferable skills in Tai Chi. So once again, starting with the front arm, going back, sweeping around, and then there's this movement of settling in and the hand comes in. When we go forward, as we settle in, the hand goes out. So again, it's not a sort of fixed system. But of course, the hand has just come in. So when it's come in, it's going to go out again. And when it's finished going out, it's going to come in again, and so on and so forth. Many ways in which this awareness of the pattern, the underlying dynamic, helps us. Try with your back hand, which will be your right hand, extending out, drawing in. Settling into the leg, turning, the arm extends out, going forward, settling into the leg, turning, drawing the arm in. And then both hands together. And bring your feet back. So rubbing your hands together. This could also be seen as an exercise that helps us just to focus inwards. Over your head and neck. And down to one shoulder. And your arm. On the other side. Onto your back. these, when they fall off, go around your hips. Legs. Light on your belly. The upper part of your chest. Some years ago, when I was teaching for an organisation that supports people who've had head injuries, I went into the building one day and somebody came up to me who'd been to a couple of my sessions and hadn't been to very many. But he told me that one of the symptoms of his head injury was that he would experience panic attacks just out of the blue, really, in the way that he described them. And he was in the centre of Cambridge by the bus stations, very busy place, one Saturday, or the previous Saturday, he told me, and he felt a panic attack coming on. And he said that he remembered how he felt in the Tai Chi. And that memory kind of helped him, because what he did then was he thought, well, okay, rather than get into this kind of panic, which is a kind of adrenaline thing in a way, he just went and sat down in the park behind. He found a bench and said he just sat in a nice relaxed way and did some breathing and so on and so forth. And he said the panic attack just went away. So this is a very powerful technique. And again, there's that thing about memory, reminding us that this is possible. You know, in the midst of that adrenaline rush, we can kind of lose that sense. And we need to remember that these are difficult times for all of us. This new normal that people talk about is actually a very uncertain situation. There's a great deal of stress becoming accustomed to. Just because we're not noticing it so much as we were a couple of months ago doesn't mean it's not there and it's not having an effect. So the practice of Tai Chi is very important, and arts like this to remind us that there is this other side and that it's not an either-or situation. Tai Chi has shown me that there is a stillness within the movement, and not only is it there, but actually it is necessary for the movement. So in order to continue comfortably, we need to find that kind of stillness. So Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain is for me the exercise that really encapsulates that. And for me, the tiger originally, apparently, so somebody said once, this was a technique for dealing with exponents, or what they call tiger kung fu, smothering the attack. I have no idea whether that's true or not. I've never had to use these arts in that way. But for me, the tiger just represents our daily lives in many ways. Not necessarily a bad thing. Lots of good things going on, but quite high energy, if you like. The mountain is this lovely image for me of stillness, but also strength at the same time. So this is what we come back to in Tai Chi. So embrace tiger, return to mountain. And then just standing. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. Does anybody have any questions before